here. So here we go.
Okay, we're live. Welcome to the Interfaith community. The Interfaith community is a G+ community, and also on Facebook you can also find us. We're sharing spiritual, religious, and philosophical beliefs for purpose of in-depth discussion. The group is loosely based on the Interfaith room from the old Stickam webcam site. If anybody has been to Stickam, I have not. But and the intention is to adapt the core concept to this type of social network format. It is important that those who join this group or even participate in this hangout is willing to interact more closely with one another, and most importantly, keep things civil. So our first guest is James the Heathen. He is part of our community. And my name is Frank, also known as Muslim Sufi. Ruben, aka Smart, Ruben Goldstein, is our engineer. And J-Dubs, which is John, is our other host for today. So this is going to be our first interview. The way we're going to probably most likely conduct this is every Monday around 7, 8 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. And this is basically what we're going to join. And hopefully we get people from different faiths and, to talk about their experiences and their beliefs and how they interact within their environment, family, friends, institutions, who knows. Welcome, James the Heathen.
Good to be here.
Good to be here. Okay, great. I'm freeballing this, by the way, because I was not prepared for this, but it doesn't matter. Bruce Lee said something about be like water. So right now I'm being like water. so James, you identify yourself as a heathen. Tell me a little bit about what it means to be a heathen, and what does it compose of? Because I'm totally clueless on this thing, but please entertain me.
Heathen is kind of originally was a derogatory term, kind of for people who lived north of the Roman Empire and the gods that they worshipped. So it generally refers to, some people define it as modern Germanic neo-paganism, but it also encompasses recon Germanic paganism, which is reconstructed, or taking an educated stab at trying to figure out what people actually did with what little there is. So the gods, Thor, Odin, familiar things. They appear in comic books. They appear in old manuscripts. These are generally we fill in the blanks with Nordic writings, so the Norse gods, but they were actually widely practiced. People as far south as Germany and Belgium, the Netherlands, people as far north as Scandinavia, people in Anglo-Saxon England, they all worship roughly something similar, with similar concepts being pervasive throughout, with differences based on which ethnic group and whatever. And modern heathenry is kind of hit and miss. Some people are reconstructing their own ethnic heritage. Other people are reconstructing something much more general. And uniquely, as pagans, there's a lot of morals, there's a lot of wholesome values. And I would say we also have a really unique struggle with white nationalism, too. Because anytime you get something, I would say, anytime you get something German and white based around heritage, there's always people trying to piss all over it. So I'd say that would be a really, really good introduction to it.
So Is it, in a sense, the religion is based on ethnicity? You have to be, you know,
It's
within.
not generally, but there
Mhm.
are people who feel like that. The practices being revived often correspond to what was the identity and language and practice of an ethnic group. But all the good groups that have real success, minus one, typically typically they'll allow anyone in. But it is, don't get me wrong, it's a big heritage thing, just like Civil War reenactment and things like that. You get a lot of white bread, no matter what.
Now, if you could tell me a little bit about your background and,
Yeah.
ethnically, and why did you, I guess, made this choice to follow this practice?
Well, I mean, I was raised Lutheran. I was poised for the cloth. Uh, I studied Lutheranism from the time, and I would say evangelical Lutheranism, from the time I was in kindergarten all the way through the first couple years of college. I studied Lutheran Church, Missouri Synod, kind of Lutheranism. It was very dry and academic and very book oriented. I took to it like a fish to water. There was no problem. And then, I found lots of inconsistencies and things I didn't like, morals that didn't add up, and I saw that it was also very corrupt. There was politics, and I didn't like the politics, and I walked. Then I spent a few years. A lot of things happened to me during that time, but I think I became exposed to new atheism and secular movements. I did activism for gay rights, things like that. And then one day I kind of started studying ancestry a little bit more closely. Not just ancestry, like how you trace it, but the science of ancestry. And I began to trace my adopted ancestry and my biological ancestry. And I built two very, very large, vibrant trees, and found that I found a lot of things, but when you go far back enough, you realize that the past is a whole other country. And I would say what unites all heathens is kind of what pulled me in as well, is there's kind of an anemoia, a deep longing nostalgia to connect to a time that you never lived in. And religion has always filled that it's a subtle sorrow that religion has always filled. But now media, comic books, movies, they try to fill that void in us. Humans always have longings for certain time periods or places. And other people also have a need to identify with something, which I think is a human weakness, but it's certainly still a need. And I think I started to study the Anglo-Saxons, who became really prominent by the 6th century in Western England, and I wanted to know what they believed before they converted. I was really interested to know about that really, really old world, the old world of Beowulf and things like that. And the more I went into that, the more I found that other people were doing the same thing. And then I learned about religions like Ausatru, like Erminik, there's things like Ferencidu and Forncider, things like that. And I wanted to know more. So all I did was I didn't commit to believing anything. I don't have a blind faith in anything. Still don't. Just I've followed this rabbit hole, and it's much deeper than I thought it was.
So how long you been following this rabbit hole?
About 4 years.
4 years.
4 years. I found it in my own family, in folk practices. I found it scattered around America in funny little ways, and I've met very interesting people. So.
Now, is there any like main spiritual texts that you actually read?
Yeah.
And if so, or if not, do you have any daily practices or something that you actually do as far as practice-wise in this path that you're taking?
For religious texts, we have things from the Codex Regius, like the Prose Edda, and then we have things like the Poetic Edda. And these are collections of old Nordic poems that are clearly pagan in origin. They have a pre-Christian flavor. So those are the two big texts that people follow. They study them intensely. They study different translations of them. They contain really old poetry, usually from the 15th century, from the 14th century, but some of it is early as from the 12th century, especially the subject matter. These are old stories, really old stories about, Odin and his family, and Thor and his adventures, and Loki and his misadventures. And there's a lot of holes and blanks that could never be filled, and that makes it even more interesting. For daily practice, there are other sacred texts too, but those are the two big ones. For daily practices, yes. I don't pray much. It's very rare. But I do give small offerings throughout the property I live on. And I have an altar with statues, and sometimes I burn offerings on there. Then there are...
I'm sorry, could you expand on burning offerings? Could you illustrate that a little bit?
Well, you take something that you like that's not easily dispensable. Something nourishing, probably food, something like that. Something you wouldn't otherwise be willing to give up. You can pour out a libation, or you could burn something that looks nice, usually some kind of I don't want to say a floral arrangement, but some kind of green arrangement. And then there's and these are daily practices. There's also the greeting of the sun, which is something I do every morning, which is historical. I wake up and I greet the sun in a formal way. There's a chant, a galdrolok, which is kind of like, we'll say, magical incantation, for lack of a better word. And then there's the more important propitiations are kind of seasonal. There are seasonal propitiations that we do in groups, and that's really the character of the whole thing. We do things called bloat. Bloat is where you exchange gifts with the gods through libations, where you pour out mead, usually from some kind of horn. And then there's sumble, where everybody in the group passes around a horn, drinks, and toasts, or they brag about something to the group that's like a baby coming or a new job or something like that. And then they hail their ancestors, they hail their gods, and there's also, in that ceremony, there's also oath giving. And oath giving is also really analogous to the entire idea of heathenry. This, you take your word, you put it out for your entire group, your family, your friends. You are bound to your word from there, and they are bound to help you carry your word out as well. And so that's bloat and sumble, and those are the two things that all heathenry has in common, even separated by centuries. There you go.
Now the word heathen, I'm wondering, you said it was a derogatory term?
It was originally, yeah.
Where does the word come from, heathen?
I think, no, I'm not sure, because I'm not I'm not an etymologist.
Was it the Romans that will say that?
I think so.
Yeah,
I think so.
Okay.
Because pagan was a word for country folk, but heathen was a word for the barbarians to the north and their gods.
I see. So, now, the whole thing with Odin and the stories that we see, is this something in the past, maybe you know or don't, but taken literally? It's like a literal story that actually happened, or was this more symbolic?
That's a really interesting question. Here's what I'll say. I think that the myths were always understood to carry some kind of truth to them.
Mm-hmm.
But you wouldn't take them literally like a lot of people take the Bible literally. The idea, for instance, the idea that Odin pulls out his own eyeball and throws it in the pool of knowledge so that he can have a drink from the pool of knowledge. This is a metaphor. It's a metaphor. It's understood to be a metaphor. But it's meant to capture the character of what the god represents. And that is believed to be true at some level, if that makes sense.
Okay. Almost, I'm thinking of, for example, in the past, the Greeks had the Odyssey. Is it something similar to that and how it's viewed?
It may be. There's other layers of metaphor too. It may be that common people believed things about the gods a little bit more literally than the priests did, much like in the structure of kind of earlier forms of Hinduism, where the priests understood some kind of mystery truth. I am very fascinated by what that may have been, and that has really been the focus of my study. What were some of these really cryptic? If these were metaphors for something, what? And what most
sounds
people
extremely deep, especially when it comes to the eyeball thing. Like,
well, it gets weirder. Like the primordial giant being slain and everything being made out of his body, and his skull being made into the sky, and his eye becomes the sun. Things like that are really interesting because they seem to represent some reverse intuition about the rise of consciousness in the world. Maybe, and I say reverse intuition because they might have believed literally that the gods were making things happen in the world. But this, it certainly has something to do with consciousness. And multiple different people who in the modern day have studied it with a really, I should say, cold, uncaring eye have kind of come to a similar conclusion.
this is very fascinating stuff, and hopefully you could just post up a link in some of the if they're called scriptures or hymns.
Adas. And we call them lays, songs.
Psalms. But definitely, I would love, definitely if you could post something up, and definitely be really fascinating to read. And I'm completely new to this. Really, what I know, it's like Thor and Odin. Never really known about the stories, but it was just really mythical. But now this is a whole different and deeper layer to it. As far as structure, and I know pagan structure, it's different from a lot of major monotheistic religions.
Yeah.
Now, how is structure like priest and priests, for example, or like being initiated or levels? Can you tell me a little bit about that, like something general in the sense of how the path is structured?
Well, I'll say two things. First, I'll say that we are orthopraxic, which is a word I got from Kevin. It's not mine. It means right practice, as opposed to orthodoxic, which means right way of believing or right way of thinking. So we have, to us, there's, for the public propitiations and things, there's a right way to do it. How you think about the life, how to think about your life, or how you think about the world in private is almost entirely up to you and the people closest to you. But okay, so for structure, we have Godhis and Gaithia, and they are priestesses and priests. We have people who are very much like shamans, we call, or magicians. So we have Drytons, who are kind of magician. We have Victis, who are kind of seer, and we have sometimes if the organization is big enough, you get Ashur-Godhis and Ashur-Gaithia, which are like over-priest, basically, is what it means. I'm not the perfect person to talk to about some of these things when it comes to structure. I think the best person, I could try to get him on here, but I doubt he'd be interested. Some of these people don't like to talk to outsiders. So.
And why is that?
I think it's twofold. Heathens know that they're in a kind of a precarious place socially, where they don't identify the rest of the pagan spectrum. They don't identify with it. They don't identify with the New Age. They don't really identify with a lot of concepts of magic. They're drawing their concepts from real times and real places, and they're trying to purge out modern influences where they can. And then the other part of it is that there are people who want to join who aren't good people and who don't want to join for the right reason, and that's usually around white nationalism. There are white nationalists practicing something like entryism, where you lie about why you're joining, recruit more people like you, and then you change the organization. So on two counts, heathens tend to be to themselves as groups, except when they're active within their own local communities. You get the illusion that heathens reach out because of the internet, but they tend not to. The ones who are actually forming what we call kindreds, which is the other key to your structural question. We form kindreds. And each kindred decides for itself as a group how it's going to be structured and what it believes and what kind of people can join and why. And kindreds, the key to kindred is family. You're not just friends once you're in a kindred. It's not like joining a club. It's joining people who you really care about, you really trust, and you build a really strong bond with them. And that, I think, sets us apart from your, not all covens, but your average coven or your average pagan circle, is that heathens want to form bonds with people that they really, really want to be around, and they want to commit to being around. So there's no leaving once somebody says one stupid thing. You want that person to be part of your life. That's when they can join the kindred, not before.
Interesting. Now, are you part of a kindred?
I'm part of unfortunately, no. I'm part of a pagan circle. There are 4 heathens in the group. Mm-hmm. The rest are various kinds of pagans and witches. There's not much around here, so I formed it. But I really brought the idea of kindred to it, because we are people who trust each other and love each other. We're very close. But they're practicing something more like general neo-paganism or Wicca, and then me and my boys are practicing something more like heathenry, as close to heathenry as we can get.
Well, that's interesting. You just mentioned something that was interesting, and I was thinking about it, but I couldn't find a word for Wicca, like the whole thing with Wicca. How closely, is it closely related, or this is something new?
You mean heathenry to Wicca compared?
Right. Mm-hmm.
No, they're really different. Wicca is a very modern idea. Mm-hmm. Any way you slice it, it draws on really old ideas, but it repackages them in a very seriously modern way. Mm-hmm. And I think, while heathenry is a modern movement, it has modern things in it. It tries to harken back, and that makes it different.
Now, as far as geography is concerned with heathen, where you're talking about, like what countries, what areas where they actually practice this?
In the ancient times,
Yes.
well, all of Scandinavia, which is Norway, Sweden, Denmark, even parts of Finland to some degree,
Mm-hmm.
Iceland. These are the places where it is practiced today most closely to the original practice. But also in parts of Spain, France, Belgium, the Netherlands, England, all throughout Germany, and even there's some transfer between the western parts of Eastern Europe, particularly in the Baltics.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say that's really where it stops, because then you get a new set of gods.
Okay. Now, there's a show called The Vikings, and I think we spoke about this a while back. How accurate, the show is as far as what the Vikings did. But I guess this is like a two-parter where in the past, when the Vikings used to go on new lands, did they spread their faith or for other people to
No,
adopt? Okay.
no.
Is there a particular reason why that
Yeah,
didn't happen?
because to them, like a lot of ancient pagans, gods were tied to places.
Mhm.
You don't have to. You don't have to. Vikings often would go to other places and worship other people's gods while they were there, and then when they got home, or if they were in trouble, they would call on their own. And that is the vision, I think, that colors most of heathenry. Uh, most of it. But
Okay.
when they moved to a new place in a big group, like in the Danelaw, like you had a lot of Danish people uh, leading up to a united England. You had a lot of Danish people moving into Western England until they had their own ethnic group there that was settled. And they were pagan. They brought their gods with them. They tied their gods to the land. It wasn't hard. I would say, since those same gods have been practiced there before many centuries earlier. But if you moved in a big, big, big group, who took them with you? I think that might not have been true in the deeply ancient world, but at least in that pre-medieval world it was. Like in the migration age, some people call it, leading up to the fall of the Roman Empire, you have a lot of Germanic tribes moving around rapidly in different directions. They were all worshiping some version of Odin, and they were carrying it with them wherever they went. Even the famous ones like the Visigoths, before they converted to Christianity, were practicing something very similar to heathenry.
Any examples, especially because my family's from Spain, so,
Yeah.
so the Visigoths, did rule, did come and rule that land for a bit. So, is there anything that, I guess a better question is there anything that we actually do here right now that is heathenry without even
Okay.
knowing?
Yeah. Yeah. Like a lot of, let's say, American holidays.
Okay.
I mean, obviously, everybody kind of has the understanding that they're pagan. But in what way? Well, they come from Celtic and Germanic paganism, generally, because a lot of culture is here in America is colored by the Anglosphere, by English culture, and English culture at one time was heathen, purely and simply heathen. When the Anglo-Saxons came to England between the 2nd and 8th century, they colonizing, spreading, and growing, they were initially heathen. They worshipped Odin. Odin was their version of the Wild Hunter, and they continued this even after Christianity. Simple country folk continued these practices. So when we have things like Father Christmas in England or Julevalr up in Scandinavia, Santa Claus, these are rehashed, chewed up, 3 times processed versions of Odin, effectively. It's not, yeah, it's very different, obviously. Like, it's been chewed up and spit out quite a few times and made very different, but effectively, it marks the end of the wild hunt. Like, when we celebrate Yule, the Yuletide, which is all the pagan-y stuff that's left over from from the folk practices of pre-Christian traditions. We recognize that at the end of the wild hunt, the Yule Father comes and gathers the last of the dead and goes and leaves his blessings and his curses behind for mankind. Well, now you've got that, but he's told the children is like, if you're not good, Santa Claus will leave you coal, and if you are good, Santa Claus will leave you, you know, insert name of stupid thing you want here. It used to be really,
wow.
It used to be really different. Okay. But the pattern is still kind of there, but it's like a fossil. It's like an incomplete, cracked up fossil of something.
Mm-hmm.
That's an example. Easter is another example. The Easter Bunny is purely a Germanic creation. You know, like, it's become twisted, comically cartoonish from its original, but rabbits were a sign of good luck, fertility. You know, spring comes, there's rabbits running around.
Mm-hmm.
And so there were a number of stories about rabbits laying eggs, which makes everything make way more sense.
Where did it's interesting. Where did that come from?
That's actually specifically from Germany. Ancient pagan Germany had stories about rabbits laying eggs in the spring as a sign of, like, as an omen of good fortune. Things like that. Just appearing in myths, basically.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So yeah, there's a lot of things we do that are heathen, but the most jarring version is specific to a particular part of American culture. The most jarring version is Pennsylvania culture, specifically Pennsylvania German culture, which is scattered all throughout the Midwest. Pennsylvania German culture has a lot of weird practices in what they do with their scarecrows, in how the men gather together to celebrate. Specifically in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, you still have weird medicine men running around and doing weird stuff, and like putting smoke over people and gathering herbs from specific places and saying weird incantations. What I learned was that those people are actually practicing an unbroken heathen practice, and most of them don't know it. You know, they're just doing folk practices that were handed down. I learned that my mother is 75, and when she was a little girl, she went to a farm in Iowa to help with the harvest once a year for, I would say, 8 years. And a lot of the practices that she described are heathen in origin. They are so clearly heathen in origin. Oh. Am I dying out here? Oh, sorry, I skipped. I'm good.
Okay.
So the best example that I can think of at the top of my head was a practice that I was studying that existed among German farmers in the 1940s. They would set apart a bale of hay or a piece of their crop, and they'd set it under a tree. And if any children asked, or any outsiders asked what it was for, they would say, "Oh, it's for the old lady down the road," or they would say something like that. Or they would say, "It's for Frau Gauda's wife." They would say, without saying what it was. But it was a joke among themselves. They remembered what they were talking about. They didn't have to explain it. My mother told me a story about where she saw threshes of wheat being put under a tree, and when he asked her uncle, what's that for? Why are you doing that? The birds are just going to eat it. They said, oh, they just laughed to each other and said, it's for the widow. And they never explained who the widow was or where she was, and the birds ate it. So that's an example of a sacrifice. That's in American culture. You can find that now.
I'm so sorry. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I lost connection somehow. Sorry.
Yes.
But what you were saying before?
Yeah, my mother saw a couple of her uncles on that farm put threshes of wheat under an apple tree. And when she was a little girl, she asked why they were doing it, because it was it's something that they needed to persist and something they needed to sell to make money. Is why are you laying it under the tree? She said. And they said, they just laughed. They looked at each other and laughed and said, it's for the widow. But they never explained it, and they never gave it to anybody. Just the birds ate it. That's an example of
that is actually very fascinating. That is so
people
weird.
people still do these folk practices, even if they're not completely cognizant of their origin. Like burning the scarecrow is a big thing in Pennsylvania. Burning the scarecrow at the end of the harvest season.
Did not know that at all.
It is so clearly a heathen practice. Well, the really fascinating thing is that there were a couple of families they're called the Pennsylvania Dutch because people didn't know that Deutsch was German, so they called them Dutch.
Okay.
Among Pennsylvania Germans, there's people who speak Deutsch, which is an extant German language, because they were basically Amish for a long time. Unlike the Amish, they weren't Protestant. They wore colorful clothes. They drank, and they were okay with fighting in wars, which really set them apart from the rest of the Amish. Among those people, there were a handful of families who had all these practicing medicine men who would go around, and they knew what they were doing. Like when they came over in 1780, they knew what they were doing. When they heard, well, there's a place where I could practice whatever religion I want, they're like, yes, let's go be Protestants over there and flee Catholic oppression. And they were like, oh yeah, let's go be Protestant over there. So there's a couple of families who knew what they were doing, and one of them was the Shrivers. And they understood what they were doing. And in the 80s, there was a movement to gather all of those folk practices in one place, reconstruct them, compare them with the folk practices and the myths and the knowledge that exists overseas in Germany, and put together a religion. And that's called Erglave, or Glaube, which means the old way. And now, if you go down to Pennsylvania, if you know where to look, you can find hofs and hearths built to old gods being reconstructed now, as we speak. And there are people bringing it back. And it wasn't hard because it was already rooted in their culture.
Okay. And who are the Shrivers? Like
Robert L. Shriver is basically the representative for Erglave. He just went to the world. There was a big world convention for religions all over the world, and he just went there and represented too. And he was helping reconstruct that path before he saw Icelandic heathenry. And when he saw the similarities, he was just blown away how very similar they really were.
Mm-hmm. So, and I see in the background where you're at right now, it looks some sort of a tree, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
It looks Celtic.
That one is Celtic.
Okay.
But we share that concept with the Celts of the world tree.
Now, with the Celts, did they worship the same gods, or were they
different gods?
Different gods. Different gods. Okay. Well, I'm definitely learning. And the other thing about practices that we do, I don't know how true this is, but I heard one of the days of the week, which is Wednesday, it's something that had to do with the god of wood. I'm probably butchering it. And the other practice is like we say, knock on wood. Is that a heathen practice?
Yeah, it's about heathens. There's a lot of superstition,
Okay.
and you can feel warm and happy about the superstition, or you could be paranoid. It just depends on what kind of person you are.
Okay.
But yeah, knocking on wood.
I'm very surprised that we actually do that. Like, I do that without even knowing. I was like, oh, knock on wood. And people will do that.
Heathens had a notion of luck that was tied to what their own might was, not what they thought their might was, just like the measure of their ego, but their own personal might, what they know they could really accomplish, versus their hubris and what the gods think would be allowing them to accomplish. So luck, for a lot of people who are not lucky but still are heathen, luck is something that's really, really fragile. So if you don't jinx it. That's kind of it's kind of a heathen thing. It's also a Celtic thing. So it's not just heathenry that has that that notion. But yeah, the days of the week are actually named for heathen gods, in large part. Tuesday is named for the Anglo-Saxon Tyr, which corresponds to Tyr, the one-handed god from Norse mythology. Wednesday is Woden's Day, which is the Anglo-Saxon version of Odin.
Oh, okay.
Thursday was corresponds to Thor, and let's see, and that's similar in German too. Like their version of Thor is called Donner. So for Thursday they say Donnerstag.
Okay.
Friday, Frigdag was the original word, which is the day of Frigga. It's the Great Mother. So there you go. Like it's
It's a
via the English language, the Anglosphere has really transferred fossils from the old culture.
Exactly. Wow. That's extremely fascinating. And as far as, practice and community, how's it looking? Is it something that people are actually people are connecting to right now, or is it something that? And how's it looking so far?
Well, we're small. We're at least 50,000 worldwide, so that's not huge. But a lot of pagans are turning to their left and right and looking and coming to. We're now well represented at things like, I wouldn't say well represented. We are now represented at things like Pagan Pride and Pantheacon, where the other pagans gather and share their things. So, a lot of people leave Wicca and come to heathenry. So,
and why do you think that is?
We have morals. We have ideals.
Okay.
Like, we have concepts of honor. They vary from kindred to kindred. We have concepts of honor, concepts of we have something that we loosely follow called the 9 Noble Virtues, the 6-fold goal. These are modern inventions, but they're meant to try to encapsulate virtues that are found in the old myths and the old stories and in the old cultures. And some of them surprisingly attract a lot of conservatives, which brings some good and some bad. Some good things and some bad things. A lot of them are very conservative values. You have things like honor, being productive, things that you would recognize in a German Lutheran congregation.
Now, let's say if a person not from the area decides to actually practice heathenry, could that person do so? Is it easy for that person, or is it accepted? And have you heard of people doing that?
What do you mean from the area?
From the area of where they practice, like in Scandinavia, Iceland, and Germany. Let's say if a person, let's say from Ethiopia, decides, hey, you know what? This speaks to me. I want to do this. will it be accepted, or will, you know, people around those circles will have a problem with that?
Well, it should be said one thing. There isn't more authenticity to what people are doing in the home countries than here in the U.S. In the home countries, they would tell you it doesn't matter. You know, yeah, this is my heritage, but if it calls to you, it calls to you. And if you want to be part of our national character, what this is encompassed, and yeah, come practice. In America, it's different, unfortunately. In America, there are people who feel that you have to have some kind of cultural connection. There are people who are more middle of the row who say things like, tell you what, you study this, you hang out with us, become close to us, if this still calls to you. Then there's people who are a little bit more condescending about it. They'll say things like, tell you what, you go study your ancient African whatever, pre-Christian religion. Go study that. Go find that. And if that doesn't call to you, come back. There are people who just say flat out no. And as you can imagine, the kinds of people that those groups attract, the people who say no, this is my thing, this is for me, everybody else has their thing, this is for me. Well, the kinds of groups that those people end up attracting are not good. And one of the things we've been struggling with mightily is I would say generally white nationalism, because they don't call themselves Nazis, they don't all wear douchebag tattoos, they don't all believe in violence, but they have really, really regressive, reactionary politics, and they try to build it into a spiritual framework. Where these are spreading the most is in prison. When the Aryan Brotherhood started appropriating our faith in the 80s and 90s, it became a trend. They realized if we could put a religion on this, we can build stronger bonds. You'll have fewer people who are willing to rat. And now gangs are starting to pick up our materials. And now on the outside, there's a new infrastructure that's willing to cater to that. And it's really weird because you're never sure who you're dealing with until you know where they're affiliated and how they feel about it. Because some of them know they're spitting rhetoric and some of them don't know. But this is a really bad thing, because anytime one of these assholes does something bad, it reflects bad on the rest of us.
Other than Christianity, is there a major faith that actually relates to a lot of the things that the heathens do? Is there something? Yeah, go ahead.
Probably not. I would say there are... Heathenry is meant to be cultural at some level. It's meant to revive an older culture and put it into a modern context. So Christianity is about as close as you're going to get, because German Christianity or English Christianity, whether it be Catholic or Protestant, is what wiped away the old culture. And so that became the vehicle through which the culture survived and is being transferred, this version of it. Like the Eddas I mentioned earlier, one of the Eddas is written by Christian Hand, just as an example. Beowulf is written by Christian Hand. So they really were the keepers, unfortunately, the keepers of the keys as far as that goes.
And I guess this is the last question, for me, and I really appreciate this. I actually just learned a lot. There's a lot of things that now I have to try to soak in and try to read, but it's really fascinating stuff. I'm definitely appreciative on that. The show Vikings, I've been seeing this show. I was seeing the show recently, and I enjoyed it, but Is that fairly accurate as far as what you read and what you know? And Vikings is a show on the History Channel, by the way. If anybody
Yeah,
knows.
I've seen it. Yes and no.
Okay.
The dress, the garb, the art, the styles, even down to how hair is done, like, it's unbelievably accurate.
Wow.
Like,
Okay.
the costume, the swords, the weapons, the way shields are painted, just every little detail is perfect.
That's
But
interesting. Yeah. Go
there's
ahead.
big holes. There's big holes. Like the idea that oh, there's a whole other land called England and France we've never heard of. That's fucking ridiculous. Beowulf is from the 6th century. It's an English text, and it's about Denmark and Sweden. That's just a small example of where that's dumb as fuck. Being able to, I mean, Ragnar Lothbrok, or Ragnar Sigurdsson, as he was actually called, was a real person, and he's told in his story is told in saga form, but the sagas conflict, and they're semi-mythical. So they are basically building a story around a semi-mythical character and trying to make it plausible. Kind of like that new movie called The Legend of Hercules, where it tries to make Hercules into a plausible historical character. But Ragnar really did attack France. You know, he really did attack England. He really did have brushes with English kings and things like that. So, yeah. Now, as far as what people believed, that's where it gets really murky, because we don't know everything about what people believed. But just the way that practices are propitiated, some of it's real. I would say the scene where they spill blood all over themselves and blah, 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 I'm not sure how real that is, but I know that blood was involved. I know that there was human sacrifice at one point. Yeah, those kinds of things, they get a lot of things half right, I would say, but just the costume, the way people are living, the way the houses look, the way some of the idols look, is all beautiful and perfect in that way. It looks.
I definitely agree. It looks beautiful. It's a beautiful show.
But like, you know, they tend to stay away from talks of the gods and whatever, and I think that's smart, because there's a lot we don't know, and I think sometimes when they try, I'm not impressed, but it moves the story, so it's fine.
Now, that main character in Vikings, his name is Ragnar.
Yeah.
Did he convert to Christianity, or was he always?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure if Ragnar converted to Christianity. We know that that's the time period where they did start to do so. I'd say Harold Bluetooth was the first person to really convert to Christianity and buckle down.
Now, in order, and I'm sure that you know, brushes, and that's the thing I wanted to talk about too, with the history with Christianity.
Yeah, that's something I know something about.
Yes, and that could be a really in-depth topic. But one of the things I wanted to know, other than the forced conversions, and I know there's history of that, if I'm not mistaken, but was there something alluring about Christianity that the heathens actually really liked about? You know, especially when it came to sacrifice. You know, with the whole thing about blood, was there anything that really kind of related to a lot of the heathen, you know, spiritual view on the world?
Well, during that transition period, I mean, it varies by country, but during that transition period, for every country, the pattern is much the same. Rome was recreating a new Europe, trying to remake a kind of Roman confederation by getting different countries to sign on to their faith, by organizing themselves around the church. And there was real power to be had in converting, for noblemen, for kings, and more importantly, more vitally, for the professional mercenaries and soldiers that served them. And so there were a lot of places where you have these really half-hashed versions of Christianity, where you have, like, where Christ is a war god who conquers death, and things like that. Stuff that just isn't biblical. You have a lot of that. You have it in Germany. You have, anywhere Christianity is introduced, and it's because you have that ruling class who wants to hold on to power in their patriarchy converting. You tend to have the country folk converting much more slowly. There are people who have argued that Christianity just simply spoke to the slaves and the country people. It's not true. Not for heathenry. I think that might have been true in the Roman Empire, but it's not true for heathenry. Country folk, small farmers, laborers, people in tiny guilds, people who were just trying to carve a living for themselves, resisted Christianity. In fact, all of the uprisings in Scandinavia, for example, against, and even fights between kings in England, anytime there was a pagan king trying to steal power and overthrow another Christian king, you have a huge mob following of peasants right behind him with pitchforks. And it's because Christianity was elite. It was an elite religion. It was designed to tie the elite to the rest of Europe. By the end, I would say, by the end, the later conversions, like in Iceland, it was just bad business not to be Christian. It just was. Like, Iceland was facing the possibility in the 1500s of boycott. They have to trade with the mainland to survive. They've always needed that. And the mainland's like, we're not going to trade with you anymore if you're not Christian. So they're like, sure, whatever, we're Christian. And you get a lot of half-assed, like, declarations like that, where people are just mixing Christianity with something so that they can go to church, pretend to be Christian, go home and do their folk practices like they always have. And you have centuries of that. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, it did. Yes, it did. Yeah, but I'm sure there's more details and more examples of that. I just wanted to read something that Ruben, when we talked about, I forget, the main character of Vikings. It says here, yes, the suggestion historically Rollo converted and became a Norman. I'm not. Rollo is his brother. Okay.
Yeah.
And a Norman, it's somebody, a person in England who's French. Is that what it is?
Yeah, the Normans were Scandinavian in origin, but they lived on the coast of France.
Okay.
They eventually, William the Conqueror comes out of them, and then they conquer England, and that's where you get the modern royal family. There we go.
Well, thank you, Ruben. J-Dubs, do you have any questions for James?
Nothing on the top of my head, man.
Okay. Well, James, I really enjoyed this conversation. I was so glad that you were my first interview, even though I had no clue who you were at first.
Okay. Yeah.
But I definitely learned a lot, and I really appreciate it. So, I guess what we're going to do now is just have an open forum, have people come in. So, hey, James, do you have any questions for me? Even though I'm the interviewer.
No, thank you for having me so much.
No, no problem. I definitely enjoyed it. And I'm sure, like, during the hangout, we're going to talk about it some more. But
can I plug something really quick, though?
Sure, no problem.
There's two organizations I wanted to plug.
Okay, cool.
Heathens United Against Racism, which is called WHOAR, and also Heathens Against Hate. These two organizations I work with pretty actively, and I think that they deserve a plug. They don't get nearly enough credit for all the shit that they have to deal with all the time. They are part of prison in-reach programs to go into prisons and talk to young Nazis and try to deprogram them out of what they do, as well as activism and standing with minorities whenever they're bullied or faced with problems. So I just wanted to share that.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you so much. And this has been Interfaith. And I guess I'll be back. Just give me 5 minutes and enjoy. Thank you, James.
Yeah.
All right.
No. He's actually logged in on somebody else's.
What is this, the silent hangout? Hello?
Hey, I just came in. Hi.
Hey, Frank.
Yeah, me and James were talking for like an hour. So,
No, I didn't see the interview.
oh, you didn't see it, right?
No.
You missed it. But it's going to be recorded, so
Great.
it's very interesting.
I didn't know about the interview.
Yeah. What we're going to be doing, like, hopefully every Monday, God willing, we're going to interview someone every week. And then we're just going to have the room open.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, so we'll do it that way. So, Kevin. Today was James. We were talking about, his path, Eden. Really fascinating. There was so much stuff that I learned I didn't even know. And hopefully, James, you're going to post up some of the hymns, or where I could find them, because definitely I would love to read it.
One of the best places is sacredtexts.com.
Oh, I know that. I know that site. Yes, very familiar
there.
with it. Yes, I do. Awesome. I'm going to check it out.
Let me grab a couple for you, though, just so you can...
Okay, cool.
If you want an introduction, an easy-to-read introduction that still has the style of the poetry but written to a lay audience, I would say The Norse Myths by Kevin Crossley Holland.
Okay.
True to the style, but it's easy to read. But here are... Let's see. Am I still live? How do I go on live?
Yeah, we're still alive. Ruben. We like to make this on live.
Yeah, we'd like to make it on live now.
Yeah, the show's over.